Have you ever watched someone who destroyed you walk away smiling? Someone who lied, manipulated, betrayed every promise they made, and somehow the world rewarded them for it? They got the promotion. They got the praise. They got everything while you stood there, bleeding from wounds you got by playing fair. You told yourself that goodness wins eventually, that karma exists, that the universe keeps score. But standing in the wreckage of your own kindness, watching the worst people thrive, you finally understood the truth. The world doesn't punish cruelty. It crowns it. And the gentle ones? They don't get protected. They get consumed. Imagine spending years building yourself into the perfect version of what people told you to be. Patient when provoked, understanding when disrespected, forgiving when betrayed. You absorbed every insult, swallowed every disappointment, and convinced yourself that your capacity to endure made you strong. But it didn't make you strong. It made you available. Available to be used, drained, and discarded by people who mistook your kindness for weakness. They didn't see depth when they looked at you. They saw opportunity. Every time you forgave, you taught them the price of hurting you was nothing. Every time you explained yourself, you handed them the blueprint to manipulate you. Every time you stayed when you should have left, you trained them to believe you always would. Then one day, something breaks, not loudly, not dramatically. It happens in a moment so quiet, you almost miss it. Someone crosses a line you didn't know you had, and instead of the usual scramble to repair things, to smooth it over, to make them comfortable with their own cruelty, you feel nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a cold, crystalline clarity that changes everything. You realize the version of yourself that kept giving chances was never respected. He was tolerated, used, convenient, and in that realization, he dies. Not violently, but completely. The man who apologized for existing, who carried other people's comfort on his back while his own bones cracked under the weight, simply stops. He doesn't argue. He doesn't explain. He just looks at the world with new eyes and sees it for what it truly is. What he sees is a game he never knew he was playing. A hierarchy built not on morality, but on power. A system that doesn't protect the pure, but rewards the prepared. He sees that every person he trusted operated from self-interest, and his mistake wasn't trusting them. It was believing they operated from the same principles he did. They never did. They smiled while calculating. They listened while strategizing. They promised while planning their exit. And he, in his desperate need to believe in goodness, ignored every signal, every warning, every moment his instincts screamed that something was wrong. He dismissed his own awareness to preserve his illusions. That ends now. The transformation doesn't announce itself with rage or revenge. It happens in silence, behind closed doors, in the exact moment you stop asking the world for fairness and start creating it yourself. You don't become cruel. You become clear. You stop seeing people through the lens of who you want them to be, and start seeing them through the lens of who they've proven themselves to be. Actions, not words. Patterns, not promises. You stop giving your energy to explanations that fall on deaf ears and start investing it in movements that speak for themselves. Every interaction becomes data. Every conversation becomes calculation. You're not cold. You're awake. People notice the shift before they understand it. Something in your eyes has changed. The desperation to be understood has vanished. The need for approval has evaporated. You move differently now, like someone who's stopped playing defense in a game designed for predators. Your silence becomes heavier. Your absence more noticeable than your presence ever was. They can't find the buttons they used to push. They can't locate the guilt they used to exploit. You've become unreadable, and that uncertainty creates something they've never felt from you before. Not love, not warmth, fear. The quiet kind that makes them choose their words carefully around you. That makes them wonder what you're thinking, what you're planning, what you've finally seen. You begin to study instead of react. Every betrayal becomes a lesson in human nature. Every disappointment becomes training in expectation management. You stop taking things personally because you've realized most people's actions have nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own emptiness. They hurt you because they're hurting. They manipulate because they're powerless. They lie because they're afraid of truth. Understanding this doesn't make you forgive them. It makes you indifferent to them. And indifference, you discover, is the most devastating response you can give someone who craves your reaction. This is where the old you dies and something else begins to take shape. Not a monster, not a villain, but something the world didn't prepare for. A man who stopped believing the fairy tales, who stopped waiting for justice to arrive, who looked at the brutal architecture of reality and decided to build his own throne inside it. Not through violence, but through something far more terrifying. Complete emotional sovereignty. The ability to feel everything and be controlled by nothing. To observe the chaos without becoming part of it. To move through a world of manipulation with the precision of someone who has memorized every play in the book. This new version of you operates on principles that gentlemen never understood. Machiavelli wrote that men are ungrateful, deceitful, and self-serving, and you've stopped arguing with that truth. You've stopped trying to be the exception that proves humanity's goodness. Instead, you've started predicting behavior based on incentive, not ideology. You watch what people do when they think no one's watching. You notice who remembers you when you're useful and forgets you when you're not. You track who celebrates your wins and who subtly undermines them. This isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition. And pattern recognition is the foundation of every form of power. You learn that loyalty without boundaries is just submission wearing a noble mask. That forgiveness without consequence is permission for repeated harm. That explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you is a waste of the only non-renewable resource you have, your time. So you stop. You stop defending decisions to people who weren't part of making them. You stop justifying your absence to people who took your presence for granted. You stop teaching lessons to those who profit from staying ignorant. You let consequences do the teaching, and consequences, unlike your words, are impossible to ignore. The world calls this cold, but it's not cold, it's calibrated. You've simply stopped distributing your warmth to people who mistake it for weakness. You've stopped offering your depth to those who can't swim in anything but shallow water. You save your energy, your attention, your emotional investment for the rare few who've earned access through consistent action, not convenient words. Everyone else gets the surface version of you. Polite, professional, present, but unreachable. They can be in your space, but they'll never touch what's real. That's reserved for people who've proven they won't weaponize it. Control becomes your religion. Not control over others. That's the domain of the insecure. But control over yourself. Over your reactions, your time, your narrative. You realize that every time you react emotionally, you hand someone else the remote control to your inner state. They push a button and you jump. They provoke and you explode. They manipulate and you scramble. That ends. You feel everything, but you choose what deserves expression. Anger doesn't need to be shouted to be effective. Sometimes the most devastating response is surgical silence. The kind that lets someone sit in the weight of what they've done without you saying a word. The kind that makes them fill the void with their own guilt, their own paranoia, their own imagination running wild with what you might do. You become fluent in the language of power that most people never learn. The language of timing, of strategic patience, of knowing when to move and when to let others destroy themselves through their own chaos. You stop interrupting your enemies when they're making mistakes. You stop arguing with fools who broadcast their ignorance to everyone watching. You understand that some battles are won not by fighting, but by absence. By removing your energy from situations that drain it. By letting people experience what life looks like without your contribution your support, your presence smoothing their rough edges. This is where the mask becomes essential. Not a mask of deception, but of protection. You craft the version of yourself the world gets to see, and you guard the real version like a nuclear code. They can study your image, but they'll never decode your intent. They can watch your moves, but they'll never predict your strategy. You become both visible and invisible, present enough to command respect, distant enough to remain untouchable. The gap between what they see and what you are becomes your kingdom, and you rule it with absolute authority. Fear begins to work for you, not against you. Not the fear that comes from aggression, that's amateur and unsustainable, but the fear that comes from consistency, from being someone whose boundaries are non-negotiable, whose word is law, whose forgiveness is rarer than gold, and whose retaliation, when it comes, is so measured and devastating that nobody wants to test it twice. You never threaten. You never warn. You simply let history establish your reputation. One boundary held. One consequence delivered. One person who crossed you and discovered that your silence was more destructive than anyone else's rage. That's all it takes. The rest hear about it and adjust their behavior accordingly. You've reached a point where emotion serves you instead of ruling you, where every word you speak carries weight because you've stopped wasting them, where your presence commands attention because you've made it scarce, where people study you, guess at your thoughts, compete with their own imagination about what you're capable of. And the beautiful part? You don't have to do anything. The anticipation, the uncertainty, the carefully crafted mystery does all the work. You've become a force that operates on perception, on reputation, on the psychological pressure of knowing that crossing you has consequences nobody wants to calculate. This isn't cruelty. It's clarity weaponized. It's the understanding that the world respects strength, not suffering. That people fear what they can't predict or control. That power whispers while weakness shouts. You've stopped trying to be understood by everyone and started becoming undeniable to those who matter. You've stopped seeking validation from the masses and started building a fortress of self-sufficiency, so complete that their approval becomes irrelevant. You don't need them to love you. You need them to recognize that you're no longer someone who can be used, manipulated, or broken. The gentle man who once begged for fairness is gone. In his place stands something the world never wanted him to become. Not a destroyer, but something worse for those who prey on weakness. Someone who cannot be destroyed. Someone who moves through chaos with calm. Who faces betrayal with detachment. Who transforms every wound into wisdom and every loss into leverage. The kind of man who doesn't ask for respect because his presence demands it. Who doesn't chase power because he's already claimed it internally. Who doesn't fear the game anymore because he has learned to play it better than those who wrote the rules. This is your evolution, not into darkness, but into dominance. The quiet, unshakable kind that changes everything without announcing anything. The kind that makes the world adjust to you instead of the other way around.